a man, who they say he murdered 3. Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Coffee can be used as a weapon if you throw it at whatever's trying to kill you. I think of this as a waste of good coffee, unless it's bad coffee, and then it's okay. You will find only good coffee at the Organic Man Coffee Trike. So if you're being chased by a werewolf, you might want to go to that other place. 4501 McPherson is home to the best coffee in the universe and some pretty good snacks as well. If it's just too far to drive, then head on over to organicmancoffeetrike.shop. Treat yourself to some real coffee. Use that other stuff as a weapon. I got to thinking about magical weapons, mostly swords, because of that scene in Monty Python's Holy Grail, and I thought it might make a good show. The problem is, I ran into so many bizarre weapons as I was searching that I had to trim it down considerably. Plus, there are so many video games out there that's just about all you can find if you type in magic sword, magic weapon, legendary weapon, things like that. It's game after game, as if that's the only thing that matters these days. The internet is jammed up with these things. Maybe that's part of the plan. Think about the Spear of Destiny. There's a very real possibility that that was a magical weapon. I did a show about the spearhead back in August 2021. Of course, modern scientists try to convince us there's no such thing as magic, probably because the elites want all of it for themselves. I dug around and I did find a lot of legendary weapons. A myth is a story dealing with origin, while a legend is usually based on history. There were so many that I put very few of them in the show. India has a whole pile of magical weapons used by their gods to fight each other. I tried to trim down a lot of the legendary Indian weapons, but then if I trimmed too much, it didn't make any sense. And so I had to leave in a lot of details that you might find a bit over the top. But that's their story, and they're sticking to it. The Cladinet's sword, or the sword Cladinets, also known as the Sword of Steel, or the Hidden Sword, or sometimes the Magic Sword, could only be attained by a worthy hero. He had to find this precious object hidden in the ground, inside a wall, or sometimes hidden behind a stove. It could be under a rock or buried beneath a sacred tree. I looked behind my stove and I didn't see any sword back there. Maybe I'm not a worthy hero. That could be. The hero must prove his strength and ability. Yeah, there's my problem right there. To raise the stove, unfold a wall, or find a weapon in other places, such as under the decapitated body of the hero that used to have it. Sometimes a hero must dig this sword from a mound or a grave because, according to ancient belief, the weapon belongs to the dead, but it holds exceptional magical powers. The word kladnets means treasure of extraordinary value in ancient Russian. A sword as well made as this one was considered to be a treasure. Back in the old times, swords had a tendency to break during hard use. Hard use chopping folks' heads off. If you suddenly found yourself with just the handle, things were about to turn nasty. Poorly made weapons would rust away quickly once buried in the ground. The Kladnet's sword would come out of the ground as good as the day it was made. Sword cabinet. Why does sword have a W in it? Sword Kladnets was not only featured in stories about East Slavic culture, there may be a connection to ancient Greek mythology. Aegis, one of the primordial knights, primordial kings of Athens, buried his sword under a huge rock. He told his wife, if they had a boy, who grew strong enough to roll away the stone and get all of the things buried beneath it, she should send him to Athens to claim his royal position. The sword Kladnets is traditionally attributed to legendary Russian heroes of mythical times. It is also known as the self-swinging sword or the mech Kladnets. It is a commonplace element in Russian folklore. Some say these are two names of the same blade, while others say that they are two distinct weapons. Since the Kladnet's sword needed to be wielded by a bogitar, a bogitar is one of a group of heroes of the Russian folk epics. The duty of a bogitar was to protect the Russian land against foreign invaders, especially the Tartars. I often wondered, did the Tartars invent tartar sauce? A self-swinging sword would work on its own. I wanted to read more about this self-using sword, but I ran afoul of the information highway being overcrowded with gaming sites. The sword is mentioned a lot, but only in name, not the powers or its abilities. The Vikings had the Danslef sword. A Danslef is said to translate to Dane's legacy, referring to the Norse dwarves who believed to have crafted the sword. According to legend, the Danslef sword was forged from a meteorite and imbued with powers of magical properties. It was originally created as a gift for the god Odin, but it was eventually passed down to mortal warriors and became a coveted symbol of power and strength. The sword's intricate design and unique craftsmanship also suggest that it may have been intended for ceremonial purposes. While the origins of the Danslef sword may never be fully known, its place in Viking mythology continue to intrigue scholars and enthusiasts alike, as well as a lot of gamers. The sword is more than just a legendary weapon. It is a cursed blade that has haunted Viking mythology for centuries. According to the legend, the Danslef was created by a group of magic dwarves and was said to be most fearsome weapon in the world. Despite its impressive power, the sword came with a terrible curse that was said to afflict anyone who wielded it. It was believed the sword could not be resheathed unless it has tasted blood. This meant that it would be forcing the user to engage in battle regardless of his intentions. Like, say you took it out to sharpen it. You took it out, you sharpened it, and then you had to slice somebody. The curse was said to befall not only the wielder, but also their family and descendants for generations to come. Some legends say the curse of the Danslef sword was so dreadful that it could bring about the end of the world. It was believed that only the most powerful and courageous warrior could hope to use the blade without succumbing to the curse. Many Viking chieftains and kings coveted this sword, believing it would bring them victory in battle. Given its curse, the desire to possess the Danslef sword was tempered by fear and a lot of hesitation. The weapon had distinct physical characteristics that set it apart from other swords of Viking mythology. One of the most notable features is its intricate engraving that adorned the blade, the hilt, and the pommel. The engravings depicted a variety of mythical creatures, heroes, and events from Nordic mythology. The blade is also unique in shape, having a long, slender design that tapers to a sharp point. It was about 3 feet long, with a double-edged blade that is about 2.5 feet long. The blade was made of high-quality iron, possibly from a meteorite, or perhaps it was made from Damascus steel, known for its durability and sharpness. I still haven't shaken this cold I caught. I know some people would say, "Oh, you got the Black Plague." I have not seen a doctor. I don't trust doctors. All they'll want to do is give me some pills and charge me an arm and a leg for them. The hilt of the Danslef sword is also a work of art, with an intricate carving and embellishments. The hilt is adorned with precious metal and gemstones, adding to the sword's overall beauty and value. The pommel, or the end of the handle, is designed to be heavy and provide balance. You've heard the expression being pommeled. It comes from being hit in the head with the end of the sword. The Danslef sword was not just a cursed blade, but also a weapon of immense power in Viking stories. The sword was said to grant its wielder exceptional strength and invincibility in battle. The sword was also said to have the ability to summon the dead to come fight alongside its user. This power was seen as both a blessing and a curse because it meant that whoever used the sword would be forever haunted and maybe tormented by the restless spirits of those killed in battle. It was believed that whoever owned the Danslef sword would never die a peaceful death, but they would be forced to die in battle. The sword was first used by a powerful and fearsome warrior king who gifted it to his son as a symbol of imminent inheritance. As the sword passed from generation to generation, it gained a reputation as a cursed blade that brought misfortune and tragedy to those who possessed it. Despite its ominous history, many legendary Viking figures coveted the Danslev sword for its unparalleled power and invincibility. Hmm. Man, this is getting old. Over time, the sword became a symbol of prestige and status among the Viking elite, often used in ceremonial events and religious rituals. Its reputation as a cursed blade continued to follow it, and many feared the consequences of owning the weapon. Some believe it was made from Damascus steel. The funny thing about Damascus steel is it's not from Damascus, it's from India. It's a long story, but during the Crusades, whenever the knights ran up against these Middle Eastern soldiers with Damascus blades, they thought that they had made them. They didn't realize they had actually bought all of these weapons from India. I didn't want to include Thor's hammer because I was having difficulty pronouncing the name. It is a major magical weapon, so here it is, Mjol- Mjolnir. I think that's how it's called. It's Mjolnir. Now, how you get Mjolnir, that's beyond me. Okay, it's the hammer of the thunder god Thor in Norse mythology. I will try not to ever pronounce it again. The hammer is attested in numerous sources. The hammer was commonly worn as a pendant by Vikings back in the Scandinavian cultural sphere, and Thor and his hammer occur on a variety of objects from archaeological record. The story on how Thor got this weapon is kind of bizarre. What's even more bizarre is the fact that I remembered a lot of the story from 100 years ago, back when I was a young kid. I did look it up to make sure that I had the story straight, so here it is. Loki, who is Thor's brother, cuts off all of Sif's hair. This really pissed Thor off, since his wife now looked like a plucked goose, and it really didn't make Sif's day either. Thor is about to do bad things to his brother, but Loki promises to give him a bunch of magical gifts. They don't say why he stole his wife's hair, just that he did. These magical gifts would include a magic spear, a ship that you could fold up and put in your pocket, even though the pocket hadn't been invented yet, and a wig made of gold. Loki gets the dwarves to make all of these gifts, including a hammer. But being a total tool, he has the handle made to be only a foot long. Warhammers had a great big long handle so you could reach out and touch somebody without them being able to touch you. The hammer turns out to be far better than Loki had expected. It could fly over, smack somebody in the head, and then fly back. It was like a boomerang. It also caused thunder, lightning, and rain. Loki had promised to give the dwarves his head in exchange for these magical gifts, but somehow he managed to get out of that part of the deal. He did wind up getting his mouth sewn shut, but that's a whole nother story. I find these stories fascinating, but I have some worries about the other folks with similar fascinations. I've met people with degrees in Norse mythology. Okay, other than teaching Norse mythology in a college, what are you going to do with a degree like that? You've got a piece of paper on the wall with your name on it that says, you know about North Norse gods. Then the other question comes to mind. Why are so many days of our weeks named for Norse gods? You do know that Wednesday started out as Woden's Day, and Woden was the German pronunciation for Odin, the Norse god. Makes you wonder. Now, I don't speak Old Norse, and so I'm going to butcher all of these following names. I have listeners all over Scandinavia, and I wish to apologize for my mispronunciation right from the get go. My grandmother's ancestors are probably already disowning me. Skeggi, or Skagi of Midfirth, was chosen by lot, that's a drawing, to break into a grave mound and plunder it. Breaking into graves was verboten, but there was treasure to be had. Vikings wanted the treasure, but not the curses that might come with it. You could say that Skeggi got the short straw, the wrong end of the stick, or the black bean. While digging around in Rolf's grave, he discovered the Skofnung sword. The other story says that Gritter, the Strong, recovered the sword from this burial mound. Nobody is certain who dug it up, but magical sword was found in a gravesite. Skeggi, or maybe Gritter, gives Cormac meticulous instructions for handling the sword, such as keeping the pommel away from the sun. Cormac disregards Skeggi's instructions and ultimately loses a duel to Bersi. The sword is handed down from, it looks like Eeyore, but I'm pretty sure it's not the donkey from Pogo. Eior. Eeyore? To his kinsman, Porkel Eyjolfsson. Eeyore lends the sword to Porkel to kill the outlaw Grimir, who has killed Eeyore's son. Why he didn't do it himself, I'm not too sure. Porkel fights Grimor, but the two wind up becoming friends, and Porkel never returns the sword to Eeyore. According to Eeyore of As, it's spelled A-S-S. I think it's As. The sword is not to be drawn unless a battle is imminent, and the sun must never shine on the sword's hilt. This is in accordance with many other ancient superstitions, such as the Eggjum stone in Norway. Eeyore also says that any wound made by the Skorfnungar will not heal unless it is rubbed with a Skofnarg stone, which Eeyore gives to Porkel along with the sword. The sword was not to be drawn if a woman was nearby. It's one of those legends. I don't know why. It doesn't say, but that's what they tell us. While Terfing, another Norse sword, was imbued with magical properties, it could never be unsheathed without bringing death of a man. It had also to be sheathed with the blood still warm on it. And no such characteristic is attributed to the Skofnorn in any of the literature. Skof, Skofnorn is briefly lost when Perkel's ship capsizes while sailing around Iceland, and all of those on board drowned. The sword somehow wounds up stuck fast on some of the ship's timbers, and it washes ashore. It is then recovered at some point by Porkel's son, Gellir, as he is mentioned carrying it later on in the sagas. Gellir dies in Denmark while returning from a pilgrimage to Rome and is buried at Roskilde, and the sword is buried with him. Geller had the sword, and it was not recovered afterwards. Hopefully, I got through those words without saying anything nasty about anybody's relatives. Since I don't speak the language, I don't know what those names really mean. Shamshir-e-Zamordneger is the emerald-studded sword in the Persian legend of Amir Arsalan. The witch mother of a hideous horned demon called Fulad Zerhi used a charm to make the body of her son invulnerable to all weapons except for a sword called the Shamshir-e Zamordneger. Yeah, that one. The blade originally belonged to King Solomon and was carefully guarded by the demon Fulad Zerhir himself, and not only because it was a valuable weapon, but also because wearing it was a charm against magic. A wound inflicted by this sword could only be treated by a special potion made from a number of ingredients, including Fulad Zerhi's brains. So you had to get the brains from this demon if you were wounded by the sword that he was guarding. The Shamshir-e-Zamordneger was only supposed to harm the demon Fuladi Zerhi. Only the demon could be harmed by the sword, and the sword could only harm the demon. Alton Brown would call this a unitasker. King Solomon had the sword in order to control the demon, who in turn was there to guard the demon. It did also bestow a shield against magic, so there was that. Some of these legends are a bit convoluted and hard to understand because as historians are translating them, they sometimes put their own spin on the story. Now for everybody's favorite magical sword, Excalibur. Excalibur is the sword that King Arthur is best known for carrying. He also had a second sword that went by Khalidfich. But some folks say that they were actually the same sword. Old English is not only hard to say, it's hard to read. There was no standard in spelling. You just guessed and made it up as you went, kind of the same way that I write. The folks who know things aren't really sure when King Arthur lived. He's always shown in medieval armor, but some say that Arthur came on the scene shortly after the Romans collapsed. There were no knights in shining armor back in the 400s. Historians claim they own the past, and they will go to great lengths to hide anything that they disagree with. Yes, I'm ranting, and yes, it's my show, so I can do that. The sword in question was also called the caliber. It was a favorite weapon of his when engaged in battle against his enemies, such as the Saxons. The sword was forged on the Isle of Avalon, famously the same location to which Arthur was taken after he was mortally wounded. Arthur's sword was not portrayed as having overtly magical powers or abilities like certain weapons from other legends. It was usually just an exceptionally effective sword. Caliburn was the name for the sword that Arthur pulled from the stone. This was just an early evolution of the sword Excalibur. It goes from just a really good sword to one imbued with magic as the stories progress. As with many other magical and powerful swords, its legend or mythology identifies it with a single hero and should not be allowed to fall into the hands of enemies or be carried by anyone except the person that owns it. In the case of Excalibur, when Arthur is dying and his wounds following the battle with Mordred, it must be returned to its source, the Lady in the Lake, rather being thrust back into that stone where it was also supposed to have come from. The Lady in the Lake is actually the older story of the two. Uh, no matter how noble, no other knight was supposed to own the sword other than Arthur. What happened to the rock or the anvil? Like I said, that's a different story. You can't expect to weld a supreme executive power just because some watery tart threw a sword at you. The rule does not always hold true in every version of the legend. In one story, Arthur presents Gawain with Excalibur, who then loans it to Lancelot. Uh, he's supposed to guard Guinevere with it. Gawain then returns the sword to Arthur for his final battle with Mordred, and afterwards it must be returned to the Lady in the Lake. If you follow the story at all, Arthur pulls the sword from a stone, only to be handed a second sword that turns into the first one by some wet woman of unsubstantiated virtues. I mean, if I went around saying I was the emperor just because some moist woman lobbed a scimitar at me, they'd put me away. Why the confusion in origin? The Lady of the Lake was actually the original tale. As Arthur's legend became popular, people simply added to it. The sword and the stone was added to the Arthurian legend by the French poet Robert de Baron in his story called Merlin. Robert de Baron presented the sword as an anchor, presented the sword as anchored in an anvil, which was later turned into a sword. Correction, was later turned into a stone. My cat is moving back and forth between me and the computer, and I'm having to guess at what my notes say. More confusion comes into the whole story when young King Arthur, he's already a king at the time, is fighting King Pellinore. His sword gets broken in battle, but just before Pellinore sends Arthur to meet his maker, Merlin casts a spell, and everybody goes to sleep. Are you sitting comfortably? If you listen to the Moody Blues, you'll catch that reference. If not, you need to listen to the Moody Blues. The young king is whisked away to meet the Lady in the Lake, where he then is presented with the sword Excalibur. So King Arthur's already the king when he receives the sword. The plot sickens as more people add bits and pieces to the legend. It's not the sword that is magical, but the scabbard. Arthur's sister, Morgan Le Fay, steals Excalibur's scabbard. That's the woman Fata Morgana is named after, which is a complex form of mirage. She had hoped to defeat Arthur through magic by putting her lover, Sir Accolon, against Arthur, giving Accolon the true Excalibur, and Arthur would get a fake. When Arthur's sword breaks, again, he knows that it is not Excalibur, but somehow manages to defeat and kill Accolon anyway. Morgan takes the magical scabbard in revenge and then throws this into the lake, thus dooming Arthur in his final battle with Mordred. The sword is not stolen, only the scabbard. The sword placed in the scabbard somehow becomes magic through the power of the written word. There are a lot of folks who tell us this is all just made up to sell books. There are also others who have found proof of Arthurian type hero who brought the Britons together under his rule. As for the sword, in the Bible, God sends a couple of angels armed with magical swords to guard the entrance to the Garden of Eden once Adam and Eve have lost their lease. What makes one magical sword acceptable and the other not? I guess it just depends on what you're willing to believe. Just think of it this way. There was a king named Arthur who owned a very good sword, and he knew how to use it. Maybe there was some magic involved, and the folks writing about it just screwed the whole story up. When did Arthur come on the scene? Maybe the 400s. When did he die? Probably around the 400s as well. Where he was buried, oh boy, King Arthur has more grave sites than seems possible for one human, unless he was chopped up into little pieces. An ancient Irish folklore, the mythical sword Fragarach, that sounds so much like Fraggle Rock, meaning the retaliator, held immense power. I don't speak Irish. Some of these names are beyond me. It was forged by divine hands. It could reveal truth and even command the wind itself. This legendary blade belonged to Nuada, the inaugural High King, symbolizing justice and authority. The name of the sword was also said to mean the answerer. Ragnarok, the mythical sword, was forged by the Tuatha De Danann. It weaves truth, invincibility, and elemental mastery, granting its welder extraordinary capabilities. The Tuatha De Danann usually translates as folk of the goddess Danu. They are a supernatural race in Irish mythology. Many of them are thought to represent deities of pre-Christian Gaelic Ireland. In Irish legend, King Nuada, or Nuadu, known by the nickname Argentlam, which means silver hand or arm, was the first king of the Tuatha De Danann. He is known from the tale in which he loses his arm or his hand in battle, and thus his kingship, since kings had to be strong and able to defend the kingdom. A one-armed or one-handed king was not going to last very long. Nuada regains his throne after being magically healed by Dian Checht. She builds him a silver hand or arm, and that's why the nickname Ergetlam. Fragarach transcended a mere weapon. It symbolizes the precarious balance that all heroes sought and their journey to legitimate sovereignty. Tales recount its ability to command the wind and compel honesty from even the most dishonest souls. Even a politician would have to tell the truth if the blade was pointed at them. Boy, we could use that. Nuada, a formidable figure, welded Fagarok with unmatched skill. Its sharpness cut through shields effortlessly, and its magic prevented lies. A fitting attribute for a ruler upholding honesty. As Nuada gripped the hilt, the sword might resonate in his hand, making a humming sound. Fragrak may be unmatched. Stories recount its ability to slice through any shield. When pointed at somebody, it can compel them to act or reveal the truth, reflecting its role as an instrument of justice. Its piercing wounds would not heal, adding to its fearsome reputation. The user's control over wind further hinted at the sword's divine origins, as its nature itself assisted the welder. The sword was handed down over time. Many Irish heroes are said to have owned it or at least used it. The sword has disappeared into history, or perhaps it was stolen by Ernest Shackleton's brother. The Irish crown jewels were kept in the Dublin castle, where they were guarded by the Ulster King of Arms and his staff on a 24-hour basis, as well as the police and soldiers. In 1903, a safe room was installed in the castle, but it was only after the place was built they discovered that the safe, which held all the jewels, was too big to go through the doorway. So instead of putting the safe in the safe room, they just left it in the library. The man responsible for guarding the crown jewels, Sir Arthur Vickers, was somewhat of a goof. He was constantly leaving the safe open, or he would leave the key in the door. On the morning of July 6th, 1907, a cleaning woman found the door to the safe standing open. She took the keys and gave them back to the butler, who then gave them back to Sir Arthur. Vickers' second in command at the castle was Francis Shackleton, brother to the great explorer Ernest Shackleton. The young Shackleton was accused by several people, including Vickers himself, and is the man most likely believed to be the true culprit. Now, Francis was a well-known loser, and he was deep in debt. It's funny how the two brothers could be such opposites. The jewels have never been recovered. Maybe the sword was with that treasure. This next word I am going to try to pronounce without insulting anybody or saying the wrong thing, but the way it's spelled, it looks like something other than what it is. The Guy Bulge, meaning spear of mortal pain or death. It also means gapped or notched spear, or the belly spear, was the name of a weapon of Cuchulainn. It was given to him by his teacher, the warrior woman Scathach, and its technique was taught only to him. It was made from the bones of a sea monster, the Karud, that had died while fighting another sea monster, the Coinchin. Some sources make it out to be simply a particularly deadly spear, while others state that it could only be used under very specialized ritual conditions. The Gai Bulge had to be made ready for use on a stream, and it has to be cast from the fork of the toes. I'm hoping this has something to do with the river and not the user's foot. Throwing a spear with your foot, I can see how that would be very difficult. It entered the man's body, the enemy's body with a single wound, like a javelin, and then it would open up into 30 barbs. Only by cutting away the flesh could the spear be removed from the enemy's body. In other versions of the story, the spear had 7 heads, each with 7 barbs. And the Tan Bo Kulne, a Chu-Chulon, receives the spear after training with a great warrior mistress, Cathach, in Alba. She taught him and his foster brother, Ferdiad, everything the exact same way, except she only taught the Guy Bulge how to be used to. She only taught Kushalan how to use the Guy Bulge feet, Feat, not Feet. He later uses it in combat against Ferdiad. They were fighting in a ford of a river, and Ferdiad had the upper hand. Kulchulan's charioteer floats the Guy Bulge down the stream to his master, who casts it into Ferdiad's body, piercing the warrior's armor and causing massive damage as it courses through his entire torso. Ferdiad dies in extreme pain, and then the spear has to be recovered by slicing his body open. In both instances, it was used as a last resort, and once thrown, well, nobody was going to survive. The name has been translated as belly spear, with the second element of the name bulga, meaning treated as a derivative of Old Irish bolg, which means belly, sack, or bag. I feel sorry for anybody that has to try and read that thing in its original language because there are some words there that I don't think anybody can pronounce. Lou's spear was said to be impossible to overcome or defend against. It was brought to Ireland from Gorius or from Findius. Lou obtained the spear of Assi, and then when he threw it, he was to say Ibar, which translates to you, like as in the tree. This would make the spear always hit its intended target. So you threw the spear and you said you, but not the person, the tree. Another name for Lou's spear was Primal. Some stories use one name while others use the other, which makes a whole lot of sense. But they both seem to be referring to the same spear. Both spears were said to be connected to lightning. The spear wasn't just a deadly weapon against one person, but the whole area that it landed in might be destroyed as well. Lou's spear needed no one to use it because it was alive and it thirsted for blood. That only by soaking its head in a brew made from crushed poppy leaves would it be controlled. I didn't know that poppies grew in Ireland, but apparently they do. Way back, I watched a 1966 movie called The Poppy is Also a Flower, starring Yul Brynner, Angie Dickinson, Anthony Quayle, and a whole bunch of actors that most of y'all have probably never heard of. Back when Hollywood was still making good movies, but they also had some really bad things in them. The story opens with the narrator telling about how people would harvest poppies and used them to make cocaine. I'm not make, I'm not making that up. That's what it said in the movie. At the time, I didn't catch it because I was rather young, but later when I saw the movie again, I was like, wait a minute, that's not how you do it. To keep Lou's spear from running rampant, it needed to be soaked in poppy leaves, which did not make opium. The leaves contain alkaloids like papaverin and nascapine, which interact with opioid receptors in the brain to produce therapeutic effects. But you don't use, but you use the seed of the poppy to make opium, not the leaves. Anytime it looks as if a fight was brewing, the spear had to be removed from its bath, dried off, and then prepared for use. The spear would pretty much dive into battle on its own and lay waste to the enemy. Ryu Jingu Bang, or Ryu Bang, or Jingu Bang, is the name of a magical staff welded by the immortal monkey Sun Wukong in the 16th century. Sun, the Monkey King, goes to the underworld kingdom of Aogung, the Dragon King of the East Sea, looking for a magical weapon that would match his strength and skills. When all the traditional magical weapons, swords, spears, halberds, all had failed to meet with his standards, the Dragon Queen suggests to her husband they should give him a useless iron pillar that was just taking up space in their treasury. She said this ancient shaft had started producing light several days earlier, and maybe this meant that it was destined to be used by the Monkey King. The staff is described as a pillar of black iron that is 20 feet long and is as big around as a barrel. It is only when the monkey lifts it and says a similar size would be manageable, the staff complies with his wishes and shrinks. After this, it is only a little taller than him and about as big around as a rice bowl. This is when Sun sees that the weapon is banded with a gold ring on each end, as well as an inscription along the body that reads, "The compliant golden hooded rod." It weighed nearly 15,000 pounds. The inscription stated the staff would follow the commands of its owner, shrinking or growing at his whim, and would make copies of itself. When not in use, the monkey shrinks it down to the size of a needle and keeps it tucked inside his ear. I wonder if this is a bad translation, or did the monkey have a hole through his eardrum? Maybe it was hung from his earlobe, or perhaps tucked behind his ear, but that's what they said in the translation. The Rui Jingu Bang is now shown as a weapon in several video games. People might think it's only a recent creation, but it has been around for 1,000 years. Goro Nuyadu Masamune was a medieval Japanese blacksmith who is widely considered Japan's greatest swordsmith. He created swords and daggers known in Japan as tachi and tanto. Many of his tachi were made into katana by cutting the tang, the part that extends into the handle, to make the swords easier to use with one hand. No dates are known for Masamune's life. It is originally agreed that he made his swords between 1288 and 1328. Now Chance is eating the cord to my phone. I don't know why, but that's what maybe he's trying to make a call. Masamune is believed to have worked in the Shagami province during the last part of the Kamakura period, which is 1288 to 1328, and is thought that he was trained by swordsmith in Baizen or Yamashiro provinces. The swords that Masamune the sword of Masamune possess a reputation for superior beauty and quality, remarkable in the period where steel was usually not all that good. Yeah, you would carry more than one sword into battle because you're probably going to need them as they broke. He is considered to have brought perfection to the art of steel making. Swords created by Masamune are referred to by the smith's name like a piece of art, like it's a Rembrandt or it's a Masamune. The legend of Masamune is it was extremely sharp, but it would only cut anything non threatening. It would not cut anything non threatening. It would glance off of leaves and paper, but it would slice right through the enemy. In the lead up to World War II, many soldiers took their families' prized swords and modified them to be used more as a symbol of power by officers. At the end of the war, all military weapons were rounded up. Many made their way to the U.S., but a vast quantity were simply thrown overboard. When I was young, there was an Army Navy store my dad would visit from time to time. They had a barrel full of Japanese swords, mostly rusty and uncared for. Today, they're probably worth some money, but back then, nobody wanted Japanese swords. The Ganjo Masamune, yeah, that sounds so much like Gonzo from the Muppets. The Ganjo Masamune is being sought today. Treasure hunters, historians, and a few government people are all looking for this blade. Personally, I think some rich guy probably has it in his collection and he refuses to tell anybody simply because, well, he's rich. I have several listeners in India. I have enough trouble speaking English, so when I mispronounce the next several Hindi words and names, give me a break. I do look up many of the words and the names and I am unfamiliar with. I listen to what I hope is the proper pronunciation. I even write down the phonetic spelling in red so I'll be able to pick it out. When I sit down in front of my computer with the mic open, I lose all ability to recall or even make the sounds so I don't insult anyone. And then I can't find the translations in my notes either. But here I go trying to pronounce these names correctly. The Brahmastra is a celestial weapon created and owned by the god Brahma, along with its more powerful variant, the Brahmashirastra. The latter is considered to be the most destructive, powerful, and irresistible weapon mentioned in all of Hinduism. Only a handful of gods and warrior heroes, namely Parashurama, Rama, Kalki, a bunch of other names I can't pronounce, were said to have possessed the knowledge to invoke this weapons. It is termed as a fiery weapon that creates a fierce fireball, blazing with terrible flames and countless horrendous thunder flashes. Does that sound like a nuclear weapon to anyone? When discharged, all nature, including trees, oceans, and animals, tremble. The sky is filled with flames. Glaciers melt, mountains shatter with a violent noise all around. When used, the Brahmastra can destroy a powerful enemy if they don't possess an alternate counterweapon. The Brahmashira Astra is the Brahma Brahmashira Astra causes collateral damage that every useful resource in the given area and prevents even a single blade of grass from ever growing in that area. It is said there would be no rainfall for 12 Brahma years, which is the equivalent of 37 trillion human years, and climate conditions would worsen. The strike of the Brahmastra will eventually destroy everything. When Ashwathama hurled the Brahmashastra against Arjuna, the Pandava countered by invoking the same weapon. To prevent widespread destruction, Narada and Vyasa stood in between the two and ordered them both to revoke their weapons. Arjuna, being a noble person, did so. However, Ashwathma, out of anger, and also because he didn't know how to do it, refused to recall his weapon. Krishna intervened and saved the world. Ashwatthama was made to surrender the gem that he had in his forehead, and he was cursed by Krishna to roam the forests until the end of time with blood and pus oozing from all parts of his body. He would cry for death, but not find it. The Brahma Shira Astra, or the Brahma Shirasta, manifests with four heads of Brahma at the front and is four times stronger than the normal Brahmastra. It is also able to annihilate someone's existence from the past, present, and the future, making their existence impossible to imagine because they do not exist in time or in the future. No reincarnation for them. The Brahma Danda, or Brahma's rod, is a weapon of self defense created by Brahma. It is only to be possessed by ascetics, and its powers are dependent on its owner. The weapon is a rod capable of absorbing any incoming attack towards its owner. When Vishvamitra, in a fit of rage, unleashes the Brahmastra into Vishista, it was his Brahma Danda that protected him from the lethal weapon. I tried to not go into all the details, all of these names of these weapons and the people using them, but then I discovered the story didn't make any sense without all the details. A sea is a divine sword revered as a primordial weapon created by the creator god Brahma to protect righteous and vanquish evil forces. Emerging as a radiant being from the sacrificial fire of the grand yajna performed by Brahma on Mount Himavat. A sea transformed into a blazing sword imbued with immense energy and splendor, capable of destroying the enemies of the gods, particularly with the Danavas. Brahma bestowed a sea upon Rudra, the storm god, the destroyer of evil, who wielded it to reestablish Dharma by slaying demonic forces. The sword, known by multiple names, uh, signifies its sharpness, rarity, and role as a protector of righteousness. It was passed through a lineage of divine and royal figures. The Asi is described in the Mahabharata as a sharp edged weapon of formidable power, highly polished, and resembling the all destructive fire at the end of a yuga, embodying an intense, radiant energy that evokes ethereal flames. In other words, it's a flaming sword. Asi is intricately linked to Agni, the Vedic god of fire, who presides over it as a ruling deity, infusing the sword with incendiary might and purifying potency. In Indian mythology, divine weapons are more than simply tools of war. They are embodied with cosmic law, spiritual merit, and a balance between devotion and ego. If you have one of these divine weapons and you have a superego, chances are either the weapon is not going to do what you want it to do, or the gods are simply going to take it away from you. It's only if you are a righteous, honorable person that the weapons are supposed to work for you. The story of Chandrahas begins in the Uttara Kanda of the Ramayana, where Ravana's ambition once pushed him to attempt to lift Mount Kailash, the sacred abode of Shiva and Parvati. Shiva subdues him by pushing down on the mountain with his toe, trapping Ravana beneath its weight. Only by becoming a honorable person does he manage to escape from underneath the mountain. I hope I got all that correct. If I didn't, feel free to let me know where I screwed up, and I will try to correct it next week. Some of those names were just beyond me. The Flamberg is a medieval sword, swung by a number of heroes, chants de geste, and romances. The name became a generic name for a large sword. I'll bet you didn't know I spoke French. Well, neither do I. That's why it sounds like I'm choking on my words. A chant de geste is a song of heroic deeds. In early texts, the name is usually given to a flamberg or a flambage in Italy. A flamberg, which means flaming, from the French word flamber, is a term with many connotations, including swords with a flamed blade. A flamed blade is one that undulates. It looks kind of like a snake crawling across the hot road. It's a wiggly, squiggly blade. The sword did not necessarily have any magical properties. It was just a really cool looking weapon. In a lot of movies and TV shows where somebody's going to do something magical and satanic, they usually use a flaming blade, a flamberge. The sword didn't necessarily have any power, it was just a really cool looking weapon. Kind of like a chrome plated pistol. People that carried them usually didn't know how to use them, they relied on the weapon's looks. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, tell other people they should be listening as well. Seem to have run over just a bit, probably because of all those words I had to try to unscramble in my brain. If you like the show, Spread it around. If you've got some stories you'd like me to talk about or you'd like to share with me or the public, send them to strangethings@arkanasa.com, and I'll either put you in my next book or I'll talk about it on the show. Until next time, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where there's strung up a man who they say he murdered 3? Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.